Good evening and welcome back to another down and dirty how-to with bugs. Tonight, I'm going to give you guys a no bullshit look on how to get a warbird ready for takeoff and how to fly one. If we can land it, that'll be an extra, but we'll see what happens. So, before we get started, the first thing that I want to say is each warbird is going to react and act a little different than the other. So for tonight, I'm flying the P-47. That's what I have the most hours in. That's what I'm the most comfortable in right now. And that's the plane that I know the system is the best out of. Yes, I do have the BF-109, as you guys have seen me fly a couple of times, but I'm not too familiar with the ins and the outs of how to cold start it and whatnot. Same thing with the TF-51 or the P-51. They will be coming more in the future, as well as the FW-190. So we'll keep an eye out for that in a little bit. But for tonight, I'm going to walk through a couple of the steps with the P-47 for you guys. So I'm not going to really go over the startup procedure too much on this. I'm only going to do stuff that is relevant all around for no matter which airframe that you're flying warbird wise. Those are the points I'll touch on, like our temperatures, how to set certain things up, etc., etc. So with all that being said, we're going to go over the controls because a majority of them are the same throughout. So we'll check a few of those out. I'm not going to go over the ones that are specific to the P-47. If you guys want a real down and dirty how-to video, how to fly the P-47, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, I'll work on that later on down the road. So let's unpause and let's take a look at our controls really quick. Okay, so let's start with our axis controls like we usually do. So the ones that you're going to want set are going to be your obvious ones. Let's go to our rudders here. So you're going to want those. Your throttle, obviously. This one here I have linked with my throttle because I have the Thrustmaster Warthog. It's a split throttle. The new one will be able to do the same thing. I'm not giving any teasers on that yet. You check out my sim pit tour if you guys want to see the exact setup and controls that I use to fly one of these. But your boost, that's going to be for your turbo supercharger. So if you look on your throttle quadrant, you see the big gray handle, that's your throttle lever. And then the one with the B on it, that's going to be for your turbo supercharger. And then you have your propeller RPM, and the red one's a mixture. We'll get into that in a second. So we have those set there. Then the other ones we're going to want to pay attention to for our axis are going to be our pitch and our roll on our joystick. We're going to need those. And then if you guys have the capability of doing it like I do, you're going to want your engine RPM or your prop RPM. That's what's going to control the pitch of the propeller blades. Kind of like the helicopter. When you pull up on the collective, you can see the blades pitching up and down. The same concept. And then our mixture. Certain airplanes will have the mixture on an axis like the P-47. Others, like the P-51, if I'm not mistaken, it's just a switch. So you're going to have to set that one dependent on the airframe that you're flying. Again, these are just the basic ones to get going here. Our wheel brakes, left and right, we're going to want those because those are a must-have and a necessity in order to taxi one of these. I'll touch more on that once we start taxiing around. All right, so that covers all of our axis commands for the most part. Let's jump over to everything else. We're going to want our flaps. So depending on your guy's setup, you're going to want to use anything from here to here for the landing flaps. Those are going to be your flap controls. So if you guys have a HOTAS setup, you can set it accordingly. If you're using a keyboard, you can also set it accordingly. So it's pretty versatile in that way. So you need your extend and retract. So the way mine is set up on my throttle quadrant for my thrustmaster throttle is if I have up, they're going to retract. If I put it back into the middle, because it's a 3-position switch, it'll hold it where it is. It'll be in that neutral position, and then down will extend the flaps. You're going to want your undercarriage toggle. That's your landing gear. I know this confused me for a little bit until I finally figured it out. Usually it's landing gear toggle. In DCS, with some modules, it's going to be undercarriage, like the P47, it's your undercarriage. So if you set it for toggle, if you have a button mapped for that, then you give that one click and it'll toggle your gear up and down. If you have something else in mind, you can set it here with the undercarriage up or down, whatever works for you guys. This really isn't needed unless you're flying combat missions with it, but just how to fly it. We're not going to use this. This is our methanol injection or our alcohol injection. These are pretty common on the Warbird era airplanes. It does give you a little boost in power, but you have to use it sparingly and be careful. We'll do a whole nother video on the methanol injection, or as I call it, the freedom button. Your gun trigger, self-explanatory, not needed for just learning how to fly the thing. Because like I've said, if you can't fly it, you can't fight with it. So let's just focus on flying it for today. Your tail wheel lock. This is an extremely important feature to use. In order to move the airplane, you need your tail wheel unlocked so you can pivot it around, and then once you get going straight where you want it, then you can lock it again and it'll hold the plane straight. It must be locked for the takeoff rollout and for the landing rollout. Otherwise, you're going to have an extremely bad day. Trust me on that. You don't want to do that. Each airplane is different in that aspect. So some have a toggled switch like this. So if you look down on our right here, there's our tail wheel lock. It's a handle. Some of the other planes like the FW-190 and the P-51, I believe, you have to give it full aft stick to lock the tail wheel. That presents its own set of tricks doing the takeoff rollout, because if you don't start releasing that as the nose starts coming down, then you're going to send the airplane straight up in the air, and it's, again, not going to be a very good day. So we'll work on that more later on. But The tail wheel lock is a must. That is the whole main point of that. Your trim is another thing that is a must. So your elevator trim up and down, aileron trim left and right, and your rudder trim left and right. Those you must have set in order to get this thing flying straight and stable. You're going to have to do that. I'll work with you guys more after we take off and get leveled out. And you guys are going to see how tricky it can be to take off with a Warbird. It doesn't matter if it's the P-47, the P-51, the Spitfire, the ME-109, the 190. It doesn't make a difference. And there's a couple of things that you're going to have to counteract for, especially on the takeoff, and that's your P factor, your propeller torque. So the propeller is going to want to drag the plane one way. You have to counteract for that with your rudders, but you have to be, like I've said, easy on the controls and show some finesse. So we're going to get into all that as we get out, but those are the basic controls you guys are going to need to get everything going. Your throttle, mixture, RPM, your pitch and roll axis, and your wheel brakes. Your tail wheel lock, if you can map it, it'll be convenient. The starting sequence on each one's going to be different, so I'm not really going to focus too much on that. I'm just going to do what I got to do with this to get it running for you guys. And once I get it running, we'll get to the next step, and that's going to be what our instruments are showing us. So let me get this thing cranked over for you guys. If you want to follow along with me, feel free to. If you guys want to fly the P-47, this is pretty much how to cold start it. Alright, our fuel valve is on main. Fuel booster pumps are on. And this is pretty much like with any airplane, you just set your lighting and whatnot as needed. Oops. That was the friction lever for the throttle, so just be careful of that. I'm just going to set my gun sight to use as a reference point for you guys. Generators on. Alright, let's set the parking brake right quick. And make sure you set the parking brake if you're doing a cold start, because you are going to have to introduce a little bit of throttle. This goes across the board. So the last thing you want to do is not be on the brakes and you goose her a little bit and she either lurches forward or goes ass over tea kettle. Bad day either which way. Unlock the primer. Radio channel set. Tail wheels locked. Now this is specific for the P-47, guys. This is not across the board for everything, so like I said, just bear with me for a few minutes here while I get us going. Let's see what we could do here. Hopefully she goes on the first shot. And clear. There she goes. You can see how I have the throttle up a little bit just to catch her going. On the ground for a cold start. That's with any airplane, so let's get our intercooler flaps going here. Okay, now this brings me to my next point for the cold start. You guys have to make sure that your temperatures are ready to go. Otherwise, you will blow the engine up. Trust me on that. So you got to watch your oil temperature, your cylinder head temperature, watch your fuel pressure, your oil pressure, carburetor air temperature. You got to watch and keep an eye on all of that. If you don't and it gets too hot, you'll blow the motor. If you don't do it the right way and you start pushing it when it's too cold, you'll blow the motor. So you got to be a little mindful of that one. So I just have our gun sight on. The guns are not armed, so I don't need them for what we're doing tonight. Let's get this thing warmed up just a little bit more, and then we'll start moving around from there. And if you guys look around a couple of the Warbirds, the majority of them have this. It'll give you little hints and helps of your airspeeds and when to lower what not to do, where or when. So like you see our flap warning in front of us here. It'll tell us how many degrees of flaps to put in for what parameters and when not to lower them. So they do try to help you out a little bit. Just take a look around the cockpit and I'm sure you'll find something that'll bring you to your next step in your flying career. Back on our throttle a little bit. Now I'm going to bring my prop RPM up just so we can start moving around. Now, to taxi one of the Warbirds, it's a little bit different than taxiing the jet. You don't have nose wheel steering on this, nor do you have tail wheel steering. So this is where your tail wheel lock and, well, I said you got to have your left and right toe brakes mapped. So in order to taxi one of these, you're going to do what's called differential braking. So you got to, whichever brake, wherever you want the nose to go is the brake you're going to very gently start working with. So let's unlock our tail wheel. Now you got to easy on the throttle. You don't want to go too fast. So we're starting to lurch forward a little bit. The wings are starting to shake. The parking brakes are off. And here we go. So if you hit both brakes, you're going to keep the airplane straight. If you want to turn right, just start tapping the right brake just very gently. And then counteract with the little left brake to straighten it out. Work with the left and the right brakes to keep it straight, and that's all. Very gentle on the brake inputs. Remember, you're not mashing grapes on this one, you're taxiing an airplane. Just go nice and easy with it. Alright, so come to the right a little bit, some right brake. And it straightens it out. And then add some left brake. There we go. Now, keep your throttle and your speed in mind, because you don't want to go too fast. And now it's straightened out. Now, if you're going straight like this, put your tail wheel lock back on. Now you see how the nose just snapped into straight? Now the airplane's going to track straight. Makes life a little bit easier when you're taxiing down a straightaway like that. So now we're coming up to our next turn. Unlock your tail wheel and add some left brake. And a little bit of right to counteract and straighten out a little bit. There we go. Nice and easy, just like that. It takes a little bit of getting used to. Just taxi the airplane around the parking lot, or the parking spots, I should say. Get a feel for it, see how the brakes feel, how much of brakes to put in, how much not to put in. Just know the limits of the airplane that you're flying, that's all. Okay. So our temperatures are looking pretty good here. So I'm gonna bring my intercooler shutters to neutral. My cowl flaps are staying open because we're on the ground still. Now your trim, you're gonna want to trim this for takeoff depending on what you're carrying, your weight, etc., etc. I'm not going to give it too much trim because we're light. We have no stores on board. So I'm just going to give her a few degrees with flaps to takeoff. The rudder trim looks good. Okay. Alright, so let's unlock our tail wheel. Normally you guys do your run up, if you get, depending on how into it you want to get. You do that, you check your mags, make sure your stuff is all good to go. But for the sake of tonight, we're just going to get this thing up in the air, and I'm going to show you guys how to fly it, the Warbird, how to trim it out. Canopy closed so you guys can hear me. Once we start rolling, it's going to get a little bit louder. Alright. Only because it's going to get a little bit louder as we start powering up and rolling here. So just keep the center line of the runway somewhat relative to your nose. Alright, let's straighten ourselves out. Lock your tail wheel now at this point, and we're ready to go. So what we're going to do is we're going to slowly introduce our power, and we're going to give rudder opposite the direction the nose wants to go. So let's power up. Here we go. You see it's wanting to pull to the left, so give it some right rudder. Easy right rudder. Okay, let her roll out. Okay, your nose is coming up, just like that. Gentle, gentle aft stick, gear up. And there you go. Now you got the Warbird up in the air. So you have to counteract on takeoff for the P factor, like I was saying, the propeller torque. So now once you guys get up in the air, you see it's going to want to kind of do some pretty wonky things. So now we have to trim the airplane out. So let's give our elevators a little trim up. And she wants to roll to the left, so let's aileron right. Just a little bit. Let's trim our nose back down. Just a touch. Alright, just watch your temperatures and your pressures. Okay, there we go. Now, the thing with the Warbird is it's not going to be a hands-off flight by any means. You're always going to have to be making corrections with either your rudder, your joystick at some point, your throttle. You have to fly the airplane. It's not like flying the F-16 or the F-18 where you can set it and forget it kind of deal. You gotta fly this baby. And you also have to keep in mind, you have to monitor your temperatures and pressures throughout the entire flight. So, as you guys noticed, as we started leveling out, the RPMs dropped. That's because they dropped our prop RPMs down to about 25. So if I drop it down to about 20, if I remember correctly from reading the manual years ago, 20 and 25, we should be in a max conserve kind of cruise deal here. And I can bring my mixture back to auto lean because we're not pushing the motor too much. So you guys got to keep all that in mind as you're flying something like this. Other Warbirds that have the auto mixtures, like the Messerschmitt and the Focke-Wulf, you really don't have to worry too much about that, but something like this, and I believe the Spitfire and the Mosquito, you have to pay attention to that. So let's kick this thing back up into auto rich. Let's bring our prop RPM back up. And you guys can see it's pretty stable for the most part. Now we're going to bring our flaps up all the way, and how differently she starts to react now. Okay, so drag will do that with a Warbird, so keep that in mind as well. If you forget your flaps, it happens, you'll know, because once you start to go to do certain things, it doesn't react the same way. If you forget your landing gear, you'll really know. And plus you have the warning indicators on your dash or some sort of light to let you know that. Alright, so we pretty much went over level flight with it. So turning with one of these, you gotta be a little bit mindful. So let's add some aft stick to the right. Now the nose is starting to pitch down. Now add a little bit of left rudder into that. Now we're turning and our nose is level. So like I said, it's a very hands-on flying experience, flying a Warbird. You know, it's on a pitch too high, just ease off on your rudder a little bit. Bring it around level just like that. The best way to learn how to turn with one of these is just set yourself up and just do an orbit around something. So let's do that over here really quick. Trim the airplane out the best that you can. Okay. And let's orbit right around this little dock facility here. So we're going to a left orbit, a little bit of right rudder, aft left stick. Let's just keep that whole facility right on our wingtip over here. Watch your altitude, compensate with the rudder and the stick. Alright. Come off on the straightaway here. And again, let's turn around it. A little bit of right rudder, aft left stick, and we backed around it. Straighten ourselves out again. Same thing. Okay, so the same rule applies for a left turn or a right turn. You just got to compensate the controls the way you want the airplane to go. And the little thing that helps you remember, it may sound pretty silly, but it works. Point your toes where you want your nose. So if you are on your rudder pedals and you point your toes to the right, if those are up in the air, that's where your nose is going to go. Same thing with the left. It's silly, but it works. Okay. So let's do a little bit more level flight coming up to our landing destination over here. Again, just trim it out. And keep your hands on the controls. And it'll fly nice and level for you. If you want to do any sort of like stunt flying with one of these, you can't really stay inverted too long. Otherwise you're going to run into a whole other set of problems that you really don't want. So just be mindful of that and be careful with it. Because what will end up happening is that all of your oil pressure, the oil runs to the top of your cylinders up on the top row and it starts locking things up, and it's just a bad day from there. So just be very careful if you do fly one of these inverted. So just fly around just to get a feel for it. Once you learn how to fly one of these and handle them, they are extremely fun to fly. They can be a handful when they want, but they're usually pretty fun. And as you can see, all our temperatures look pretty good. Everything's sitting pretty happy, so I'm okay with that. Let's see where we are in relation to where we need to be. Oh, we gotta turn around. That works. It kind of just glides around turns like that. Can get a little bit more aggressive with it if you really wanted to, like kick the rudder over a little bit more and snap it around, but you got to compensate with the joystick and get ready to recover it when it comes out. Maneuvering one of these is a whole different ballgame than learning how to fly it, but you have to start somewhere, and that would be learning how to fly it first before you learn how to maneuver it. They are extremely easy to spin out and not as easy to recover. So you got to be mindful of quite a few things. I'll do a whole nother how-to on how to maneuver one of them later on down the road for you guys. Do is we're going to find a runway and hopefully land this baby in one piece. And I'm going to try and show you guys a couple of pointers and tricks to land this thing. So the P-47's a little bit different than the Warbirds that have your tail wheel lock on your joystick when you have to pull it full aft. So you guys have to be mindful of that on your approach speed. And when you touch down, This is a little bit more forgiving to an extent, but it has its own set of quirks behind it. So it's just find the airplane that you want to fly, and that's the one you go for, and you work with it. So let's pop over here. Alright, now to configure yourself for landing, you gotta really be on the ball with this one. Alright, so oops. Let's bring our prop full forward. I'm clear for my flaps to come down. Give it 10 degrees again. Like I said, you guys gotta watch your airspeed with these things, because they will fall out of the sky. The P-47 in particular, like I said, each one has their own quirks. This one is extremely heavy. Let's get our gear coming out. See how she's starting to wobble around a little bit, so you guys got to be easy on the controls. Alright, we got 3 down and locked, we got our green light. Now you're going to want to keep your nose pretty level coming in, because you got to remember you're a tail dragger now, you don't have a nose wheel. But you don't want to go too far forward, otherwise you're going to smack your propeller into the ground. Warbirds can be very, very finicky to land, and they take a lot of practice and patience to get it pretty, well, decent, at least. So you got to work with your rudder as well, remember that. On top of your wheel brakes once you get on the ground, but not too early, otherwise you'll have a bad day. But let's just focus on getting her down first. So you see how pretty much my nose is up a little bit, because I want to come down on my main wheels first, but I want to come down on a 3-point. And you guys that fly the ones in your tail wheel locks back when you pull your stick aft, you don't want to do that either. So just watch your rate of descent. We're a little all over the place here, but gentle, gentle. And if that happens, just power up. Careful, 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 Bugs. Careful, careful, careful. Come on, Bugs. Alright, so a little bit of rudder. Just compensate for that one. And that just saved the airplane. That's what happens when you look away from what you're doing. Well, Like I said, the landing process with the Warbird is a pain in the ass. I should have set that a little earlier. That's my fault completely. I'll do another how-to on how to land a Warbird, and I'm going to go over the different styles of landing with the different tail wheels, like the lock on the P-47s as opposed to one that you have to pull the stick back to lock your tail wheel. Keep an eye out for that sometime in the future. I hope this video helped you guys at least to be able to taxi one, get it up in the air and fly it around a little bit. Landing coming soon. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please like, comment, subscribe for more. And until the next sortie, strap in, arm up the seat, and keep flying.